to it than that. It's like, I think of wrestling. There's this scene in the Old Testament where Jacob wrestles with an angel. He's wrestling with God, actually, which is quite an interesting. That's what Israel means, right? Wrestling with God. Yeah, that just blew me away when I learned it. It's so
Is that true?
The true people of Israel are those who wrestle with God.
Huh.
Yeah, it's not believe exactly. It's a whole different thing, man. It's a whole different thing. And
Isn't
so,
it like fear from God? What it means? That's what I thought.
well, from the work I did in the last couple of months looking at this, and I looked into it quite deeply, it does mean wrestling, essentially, and it does derive from that scene in the Old Testament where Jacob wrestles with God. That's when he gets the name Israel. And his hip is dislocated, right? Permanently. He has a permanent limp after that. It's no joke. But I think of marriage the same way. Like, people think, well, they lived happily ever after. It's like, that's not what you want in a marriage.
Yeah.
You want someone to contend with, you know, because you learn through that wrestling, you know,
Sure.
like, you learn where you're an idiot and where you should stop being, and vice versa.
Yeah.
So that's the spiritual aspect of marriage. It's the fact that you have to contend with someone under all sorts of circumstances. Theoretically, is what would you say? It's a manner of promoting psychological, or you could say spiritual growth, and it's genuine. You know, that's why marriage is a sacrament in most human communities, right? It's stamped both by the state and by the sacred authorities, because it's not just a physiological union. That's what animals do. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with the physiological union, but it has to be placed in the context of everything else a human being is. And I do think it's dreadful for people not to have that. And
Do you think it's hard? It's become harder for people to have meaningful, lasting relationships, or has it always been this hard? I feel like I thank God that I'm not dating now, because I feel like it seems like it's miserable out there right now.
well, it's
To
hard.
try to meet people.
It is hard although, you know, it's easier to meet people because there's more ways of meeting them.
Right.
But the ways of meeting them is the rise of the internet dating option has actually overall been good for people who are looking for a partner. Now, there is some speculation and some evidence that it lowers the transaction of separation and divorce. You know, because one of the reasons you don't separate or you don't get divorced is like, well, you're going to find someone else. And if it's easier to find someone else, then perhaps you're more tempted to sever the relationship. So maybe you lose in one place where you gain in the other. But I think there are different kinds of hard that it is. You know, it's hard for couples to figure out how to manage two careers. It's hard for women to figure out how to get educated and get their career launched at the same time that they're finding a partner and having kids. Women have this tight time frame, you know. I mean, they've got to get a lot done by the time they're mid-30s for sure. And so it's not much time, you know. It's like 15 years really from the time you're an adult. You better get at it. It's not very long.
Right.
So I think there are new challenges that have arisen that weren't there for previous generations. But previous generations had it hard in other ways.
That's very true. Yeah. Like dying
Like they
at
died.
50.
Yeah. Or in childbirth,
yeah.
for example.
I feel like people also need to like understand how to make a relationship work. Like, it's not just magically. You need to kind of put in the work to make it work.
It's hard.
You need
It's
to put
challenging.
in effort and compromise a lot of times on, like, if you live by yourself, you can do everything the way you would want.
Yeah.
If you live with someone else, then there's compromises to make.
Yes.
But in the long picture, it's better for you.
Well, that's it. That's it. There's sacrifices to be made in the short term.
Yeah.
You know, and I mean, people have to. The effort issue is like, well, when you're in love with someone, you're going to organize your schedule and make them a priority. And, you know, that's in some ways a fleeting state, although it's not necessarily as fleeting as people think it is, but whatever. It's obviously a priority. Then you get married and, you know, you kind of get accustomed to having each other around, and then everything else is more important and the relationship drifts to the bottom. And then people get dissatisfied and they start looking for excitement and adventure otherwise. Well, you can't do that. You have to prioritize the relationship. Like, my observation clinically has been, for a couple to maintain their relationship without it deteriorating, they have to spend 90 minutes a week together talking about their lives, about how the house is run, about what they've all been doing to keep their stories caught up, right?
That's not really even that much,
No, it's not. It's not. It's not that much.
Yeah.
But which is a good thing. You can actually do it, and then they need to spend at least one time having a date, and 2 is better. 1 is necessary. 2 is better. You can't aim for a lot more than that because, you know, life is very busy, and if it's going to be sustainable, it has to be realistic. But they need to make time for each other twice a week and talk in a non-romantic way, just practically about the domestic economy and about everything that's going on, and that keeps people tied to each other and updated. And so that's sort of your minimal commitment level if you don't want things to deteriorate. So and
That makes sense.
I love hearing you put these like abstract things into like measurable, tangible things. Like 90 minutes talking, a date a week.
It's
you
funny,
want to make it concrete,
materialize like
I'm used
these
to this
feelings.
stuff being kind of like scams, like 5 steps to success. Just follow these 5 steps and you will make it. But this is the first time that I hear actual steps that you can really take, and it makes sense in my head that it would really improve something simple. You know?
This is the study of psychology, right? I mean, this is what you and your colleagues do, or is this?
Well, part of
I
it.
don't know any. I've never talked to a psychologist.
Well,
I mean,
I'm trained psychoanalytically. I did most of that training myself, but also behaviorally. And I was technically trained as a cognitive behavioral psychologist. And what they do is they take large problems and break them down into small problems that can be solved and measured.
Yeah,
So,
I love it. And it's great. And it goes back to what you're saying about the complexity of society. I feel like hearing these really intangible problems, even feelings, as something measurable is relieving.
yeah, you want to break it down into something simple and accomplishable. Like, let's say you want to write a book. It's okay. How do you go about writing a book? Well, the first thing you do is decide how much time you can steal of your own and get away with it on a regular basis. And you might think, well, I'll wait till I have 8 hours of unbroken time and I'll sit down and write. It's like, no, you won't. First of all, you're never going to have 8 hours of unbroken time. That's never going to happen, especially as you get older and take on more responsibilities. And you don't have the discipline for that anyway, so that's not going to happen. It's like, you want to write a book? Start by stealing half an hour a day. Make it religious. Sit there for half an hour. Even if you don't write anything, you should be able to get at least a sentence or 2 out. Well, let's say you write half a paragraph a day. Okay, so then we can do the arithmetic. So that's a paragraph every 2 days, or 3 paragraphs a week, so let's call that a page. Well, in a year, you've got 50 pages. All right, well, that's not bad. It's a quarter of a book, you know. And maybe once you've mastered the half an hour, you can extend it to an hour, you know. You're not going to get much past 90 minutes because your time isn't exactly your own. Other people are taking it all the time, especially if you're productive. You have to fight like a junkyard dog to get your own time. But, so one of the things you can do is that if you have an aim of some sort, you want to break it down to what's necessary in the day and then iterate that. And the other thing I tell my clients, for example, is like, we also have a bad idea about what's important in our lives. To think, well, this vacation, man, this is going to be a once-in-a-lifetime trip. It's like, well, then who cares? It's 2 weeks out of your life. It's irrelevant. Here's what's relevant. You sit down and you have dinner with your family or your partner every day. All right, so we'll do the math on that. That's easy. Let's say it's an hour and a half, including cooking time. Let's say it's kind of miserable. You know, you're angry in the kitchen, the food isn't that great. One of you watches the damn cell phone and the other sort of fumes. That's your dinner. Okay, it's like, okay, we'll do the mathematics. So that's 90 minutes a day. So in a week, that's 7 times, so that's 7 hours, that's 7.5. So that's, let's say 10 hours, 11 hours. Okay, 40 hours a month. 480 hours a year. Okay, so that's 12 work weeks. Right, that's 3 months. You're spending 3 months of work weeks being miserable with each other at dinner time. That's a really bad idea. It's a seriously bad idea. It's like, fix that. You're going to have to fight about it. It's like, we're not having that much fun at dinner time. It's like, why not? Well, I don't like being in the kitchen. You don't appreciate it, or whatever it is. Like, because there's tension in kitchens, man. There's no doubt about that. It's like, get that right. Those things you do every single day that repeat, that's your life, man. So when you think, well, that's just mundane, that's just day-to-day stuff. It's like, yeah.
That's the shit that matters.
Well, all you have to do is the arithmetic. I had a client who was fighting with his kid, trying to get him to go to bed. You know, and the average adult parent only spends about 20 minutes of one-on-one time with their kid a day. Right. Very interesting thing to know. Like, okay, so he's spending, how long does it take you to get your son to go to bed? 45 minutes. Is it pleasant? It's like, no. It's not pleasant for him. It's not pleasant for me. Let's do the math. We'll call it an hour. 7 hours a week. It's 28 hours a month. All right? So we'll call that 30. 360 hours a year. It's 9 40-hour work weeks. You're spending 2.5 months fighting every year. Do you think you're going to like him? You think he's going to like you? It's like, no. Fix that. Fix it. It's every day. It makes your life miserable, those things. So, that's another thing is your life is a repetition of days. And so it's really important to get the days right and then repeat them. And so a schedule can help with that too. It's like, okay, schedule in the things you have to do so that your life doesn't get worse. Those are responsibilities. And then schedule in the things that you would like to do. Use the schedule as if it's your friend and not your tyrant. That's really useful. And computer schedules they're great for that.
Yeah.
But you got to think, this is not my tyrannical father standing in front of me with a big whip, punishing me every time I make a mistake. That's not what this schedule is. It's my friend who's saying, let's have a really good day tomorrow. And that would be, well, we better get the mess out of the way a little bit because it'll just compound and that's not good. But let's throw some things in there that might make life worth living a little bit. So,
how do people know if they should talk to a psychiatrist or a psychologist?
Suicidal thoughts, that's a good one.
Okay, yeah, that's
pretty extreme.
That's
well,
an easy
well,
indicator,
but you can be specific about that. Okay, because let's say someone comes
more about like an ordinary guy. Having trouble, he's not close to killing himself, but he's stressed out, he's anxious, he's depressed. Small things irritate him. Or to any degree of that, right?
Okay, well, one of them I would say is like, let's say you have a bunch of memories from your past that are associated with emotional pain and they keep recurring. That's a good example because what that means is that you have
some trauma.
Yeah, well, we can define that even. So, you feel negative emotion when you lay out a desire in the world and it doesn't manifest itself, right? So you're disappointed. Okay, so what does it mean? It means you didn't know how to master that place and time. So maybe you were bullied in high school, and it means you didn't know how to socialize with people properly. And now you're afraid of people. And so these thoughts are always coming back about how you were bullied in high school and how terrible that was. And it's like, why are the thoughts coming back? And the reason is the systems that produce anxiety are regarding your inability as a threat. They're saying, there's a threat, there's a threat, there's a threat. You don't know how to deal with people. There's a threat. And it's never going to go away because it's an alarm system. It's trying to tell you about threats. And so then what you have to do, and you can do this with a therapist, is to figure out, okay, how did all that bullying come about? What, if anything, did I do to make myself vulnerable, or what situation made me vulnerable? How should I interpret that and then change my perceptions and actions so that that isn't likely to happen in the future ever again? And then that'll go away, because people think the purpose of memory is to represent the past. That's wrong. The purpose of memory is to stop you from doing the same stupid things over and over. So, yeah, well, of course, right? Why remember the past? So the future is better. That's why. And so if you have a lot of things if you're living in the past and you're plagued by things, then you're stuck back there in some ways. You haven't mined the experience for everything that it can teach you. And so it's when you have a bad experience, your body reacts first. And then your emotions react. And then you think about it. But sometimes it never gets past your body or your emotions. It's just, it never gets processed past it. You're molested as a kid. Like, how the hell do you think about that?